In 2006, British Gymnastics appointed a new figure to lead the men's artistic gymnastics programme. Over the course of the next 7 years, that team climbed from 23rd all the way to the third best team in the world. I was lucky enough to be a big part of that story. And over the course of that time, I experienced, observed, and was able to learn all about leadership. I was fascinated with what makes a great leader ever since I was a little kid, and this is my story. So today's episode, I'm really going to focus on leadership. I'm really excited about this one because throughout my career and my life and the 30 years I've had so far, and like I mentioned there, when I was a kid, I've always been fascinated with what makes great leaders, you know. When my dad would tell me about Churchill and, you know, I was a massive fan of Sir Alex Ferguson. I'm a Man United fan, and these great, almost messiah-like figures that would lead people. And I can remember when I was a kid, when I was about 9 years old, I got into the video cabinet in my house, VHS tapes, and I took Saving Private Ryan and Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels, and my dad kind of came into the TV room and found me watching these bloodthirsty, gory films. And I can remember Tom Hanks on the beaches of Normandy, and that first scene, that first 10 minutes, you know, when the Allies land on the beach, and I was just mesmerised by it. And so since then, you know, growing up around people like my granddad was a great leader, my dad, Sergey, they always instilled in me like these values, principles and morals that I think, you know, I don't think they were purposely trying to turn me into a leader, but they were things that, you know, I've noticed that the great leaders that I've worked with, they kind of all possess, but they have these special gifts as well. And throughout that time, like I said, from 2006 all the way to 2012, as a men's artistic gymnastics team, we climbed all the way from 23rd to 3rd, which is an incredible achievement. Like, that's amazing. And someone was brought in 2006 to kind of shape the program. And there were lots of great leaders within that team and that setup and that coaching setup. But it was a really interesting experience to be part of, because it didn't always go to plan. And there was lots of mistakes that were made along the way. And when I think about, you know, the things that make a great leader, and probably the types of leadership that I would say would lean more towards the negative side and bad forms of leadership, I've really experienced all of those. And when I think about the good leadership qualities that I've seen within people, I'd break that down into 3 main ones, and there's loads of them. And the first one for sure is inspiration. So when I was a kid, I guess the first leaders that I really came across were people like my granddad, my dad, and Sergey, and they were incredible at inspiring people. So when I was a kid, you know, Sergey's passion and authenticity and his ability to inspire a group of kids to believe in this common goal and go into the gym every day enthusiastic, trying to achieve this impossible dream in many ways, was amazing. And he was a brilliant leader. And I guess the same with my dad. I've watched my dad work with young football teams across the years, and football teams that my brothers played in. And I remember when my brother was about 14 or 15, they played in a football league, and they were playing a year above. And they were all dead small, a lot younger, a lot smaller than all of the other boys in this under-16 league. I think they were 14, 15. And it was amazing to hear the stories that my brother and my dad would tell about it. And, you know, I've always been fascinated with that. And I think the inspirational leader is one that's super important. And I think the authenticity is massive, because you often hear about managers in football teams losing the dressing room. And, you know, it's quite difficult sometimes when you're on your own, and maybe you're in an individual sport, and you've got somebody in charge. It's quite difficult at times to notice that authenticity and actually, is this guy a fraudster, or is what he's saying, is it true? Can he back it up? But I think when you're in a group of people, and especially when you're in a group of like young men or young women in a team, you pick up on that straight away, and you can tell, like, people as a group, the group can read whether somebody is, you know, really honest and authentic, and what they say, they believe what they say. That's really, really important. So I guess the inspirational leader is a massive one. The next one I'd say is probably the wise leader. And I was lucky enough over my life to work with lots of people like this. And I would say not all of the time, but a lot of the time, the wise leader tends to be the more experienced leader type of leadership. The person that's been around for a longer amount of time. They've seen lots of different circumstances and scenarios. And, I had a perfect example of this in 2010. I'm going to come on to tell that story later on because it was fascinating to be a part of. And when I look back now and I look back at that time, from 2006 to 2012, and especially towards the end of that, in the lead up to the Olympic Games, I feel so fortunate and lucky that was such a formative experience for me. And there were so many little nuggets, gold nuggets I could take of information and experiences and life lessons to learn that's going to help me in the future. And, it has helped me in my life for the past 30 years. So the wise leader is super important. I think it's the person that is able to probably sit back and almost like a lifeguard. And I've seen these people operate, they're not the loudest. When you're doing a lineup before the session, they're kind of not shouting and barking orders throughout the session. They sit back a little bit and they probably analyze what's going on, the situation, the different characters. They're very good at delegating the right jobs to the right people. And I think because these leaders most of the time have got more experience, they have a lot more self-awareness. They know what they're good at. They're really secure in themselves. And in this one particular leader that I will talk about later, like in the situation that unfolded, it was a extreme situation with so many different variables going on, and we were under extreme pressure. And they were really able to understand, okay, what am I good at? What can I bring to the table? What does this group of young men need right now? And where can I delegate different jobs to different people? They were amazing at that. And I think that's what the wise leader kind of brings to the table. And then the other one is a decision maker. People that are really good at making decisions, because quite often I think you work in jobs maybe and you think, God, why does this person at the top get paid so much money? And the reason they get paid more money quite often is to be the person that puts their neck on the line to make the big decisions. They're not necessarily getting paid more money, or they don't get more notoriety or I guess the applaudits because they're doing as much work on the ground as you are, but their head is going to be on the chopping block when they make a big decision. And that's super important, and we need these people, and we need that in leadership because they've got to make the big call in the big moment. And whichever way that goes, whether it turns out to be the right decision and they, are the hero, or it turns out to be the wrong decision and they're able to take that accountability and responsibility and they appreciate the position that they're in and they know that in the end it's their call to make that decision. So those three leaders, I think the inspirational leader, the wise leader and the decision maker for me are three of the real character traits that I've come across throughout my career and when I've experienced brilliant leadership. They've all had that in parts, but I think different leaders kind of have different super strengths. That's how I'd describe it. The wise leader, the inspirational leader and the decision maker, they all kind of have different super strengths, but they all possess all of those characteristics. Now, when I've experienced probably the bad leadership at times, and I think it's really important to say that, you're not born a great leader. You've got to learn and you've got to make mistakes along the way. So I've experienced, working under people and working with people and working in teams where we've made big mistakes and the leadership has made big mistakes, but then they've been able to learn from that and not make it again. And that's super important because you don't just start out in a position of leadership and get everything right, and it's really difficult. Sometimes you're making massive decisions under real high stress, high pressure environments. And so that's really hard. But I'd say the first one is probably the messiahs, the self-proclaimed leaders. I had an experience a few years ago. It was probably in 2017, 2018. And I'd gone to a gymnastics competition and I'd been sat there. And at the time, there'd been a bit of an issue within the junior program. And some of the younger athletes had done something very stupid and got into quite a lot of trouble. And I was having a conversation with a former teammate of mine, and another young coach came over, and they started saying what they'd do if they were in charge. And if I was in charge, this wouldn't happen, and I'd take them all off the squad. And I kind of went away from that conversation, and I thought, you probably aren't ready to be in charge just yet, And what I've learned in my life, and I know this because I've been the loudest person in the room, is that quite often the loudest person in the room is normally the most insecure, and actually, there's not very strong foundations to their ideas and what they're talking about a lot of the time. And you have to watch out for that, I think, in leadership. The people that want to be in charge, or the people that are telling everybody, I'm in charge, they're probably not the people calling the shots. And I think the best leaders that I've come across have been the ones that have almost been very reluctant to take that leadership role and have almost been propped up by the team and the people around them. And I've certainly experienced that. I know that when we first started out and in the men's squad, when we would go to these big competitions, we'd never really had a team captain before. And we had a little system where we would basically write the names on a piece of paper and we'd put them into the hat and the head coach would pull it out. And that was kind of how we selected who was going to be the team captain. It was really interesting. I'm going to tell that story from 2010 up to 2012 a little bit later in this episode. So that would be the first bad leadership, skill and type that I've come across is the Messiah, the self-proclaimed leader. I think the next one would probably be the best friend. And this one's tough. And I've observed this and watched this. And there's different types of leaders, right? You can have somebody leading a business. You could have somebody leading a group of athletes. You could have a team captain. You could have a coach. The one that I noticed that seems to be what a lot of people jump into when they first get into that position of leadership or coaching or, leading a group of athletes or being a team captain is the best friend. And the best friend one is really, really interesting to observe. And I've noticed this a lot. And it's the easiest thing to do to get people on board is to become their best friend. Okay? And I've seen this one play out many times, especially within coaching. To get athletes to do what you want them to do, you bring yourself down to their level, and you learn to be best friends. And I've talked about an example of this in the past, how Sergey would go around knocking on everybody's doors to make sure they were still sleeping. And at the time, everybody would be annoyed at Sergey for doing that. But years later, you look back and you go, I understood that. Sergey knew, and his job was to be coach first and foremost. Not your friend. He wasn't my friend. Although we became best friends in the end, his job was to be my coach. So he had to be able to tell me when I'd done something wrong, or tell me if I needed to adjust my training, or if I was making the wrong decisions, or if I needed to correct course or pivot. I needed Sergey to be able to do that, and it meant that we needed a relationship where he was my coach first. And the easiest way to get athletes normally on your side is to be their best friend. But that becomes very, very difficult further down the line when maybe you need to have a difficult conversation with them and you need to take them off the squad or tell them they're not going to be selected for a competition. So being the best friend, that normally doesn't work out in a role of leadership in my experience of what I've witnessed and observed. And then the last one I'd say is probably the bully. This is probably the worst one, and I've experienced this a lot throughout my career at times. And the big one and the big experience of this I had was probably post 2017. So we'd had a situation where this was after the Rio Olympic Games. I was going through that period where I was struggling quite a bit. I'd put a lot of the stuff to the back of my mind. I was pretty angry with the program, the squad, the system in place. And I came to a training camp in the summer in 2017. And essentially, the head national coach at the time had said, guys, I'm going to gather you for a meeting. Have you read your contracts? Because we were getting new contracts with British Gymnastics, right? And probably actually about a year before this, it was the start of 2016. I'd gone down to training early because we used to have to do our hydration tests. We were at a GB national camp. We'd just been handed our contracts for the start of 2016. And I was going to the toilet and Lewis Smith walked out of the toilet and he said, "Morning, Sam, you all right?" I said, "Morning, mate." And he said, "Have you read your contract?" I said, "What?" And he said, "Have you read your new contract?" And I went, "Oh, no. And he was like, "You should always read your contract before you sign it." I kind of thought about it, and that's always stuck with me. So ever since that day, I listened to Lewis's advice, and I always read any contract. But I never used to do that. I was never bothered. I just thought, they'll never put anything in there that's going to screw me over. I've got to sign it anyway, so I'll just sign away. Now, fast forward 18 months, there was a new contract for us to sign. And the head national coach at the time had decided that, he didn't agree with some of the stuff that was in this contract. And we had this little meeting. I went away after the training camp, and the boys had gone out to the World Championships in Canada. And when they came back, we had another training camp, and a lot of the younger guys came up to me and they said, look, Sam, these contracts that we've been asked to sign, we're not happy about it. We basically want to refuse to sign them, and so because we want to get some things changed in the contract. And they were like, and we want you to be like on board and to help us. And at this point, I was kind of really like disengaged with the squad and the program. I wasn't bothered. I just wanted to do my own thing. I wasn't in a very positive mindset. But the younger lads had come to me, and I thought, do you know what? Like, because they've come to me and they're seeking, I'm going to help. I'll be on board. So I sat down. We had lots of meetings, and we basically called a big meeting with all of the gymnasts on the squad, juniors, seniors, and all of the personal coaches, and the head national coaches, technical directors, and the CEO of British Gymnastics. And we all sit in this meeting, and within this contract were things such as, if we got approached by a sponsor, we had to let British Gymnastics know first. So we had to ring them up, give them a heads up, we've been approached by this sponsor. And I'm pretty sure it was worded in a way that so they had to give you a thumbs up whether you were allowed to be sponsored by them. And also it might be an opportunity for them to get a sponsorship for the whole squad. So there was lots of little things. There was also a weird clause in the contract that I had read that was post-Olympic Games, British Gymnastics have the right to set up a tour around the UK where we would tour around cities and do gymnastics shows, and we'd be contracted by British Gymnastics to do that. There was loads of weird little things. Now, what was going on, to give you a little bit of context at the time, is that there was a big loggerheads between the head national coach and the CEO. And this had built up from the back of 2016. So this was also another dynamic that was going on. But we went into this meeting, we're all sat there, and it was basically an opportunity for us to voice our concerns and talk about what we wanted to be changed in the contracts, and for British Gymnastics and the CEO to respond. And we're sitting down there, and I'm kind of like reading the lay of the room and the land and how this conversation is going. And for me, I just felt it was very much like a tick box. And one of the younger gymnasts in the squad, he wasn't shy of making his voice heard, kind of piped up and asked a question to the CEO, and she basically started wagging her finger and raised her voice quite a lot. And I kind of smiled, and I realised in that moment, because I'd had that finger wagged in my face 12 months prior in my meeting following the 2016 Olympic decision. And I realised in that moment, you're just a bully. That's how you've climbed your way to the position you're in. You are the biggest bully in the room. And she just talked down to him. And I just thought, we're not going to get anywhere with this. This isn't going to work. Anyway, we all signed our contracts. I think there were a few amendments were made. But that, I really realised in that moment that never works. And ultimately, that person in that position of leadership got found out a few years later and had to step down when the Me Too movement came out. So I'd say that they are the three types of leadership I've experienced that were the bad types of leadership: the bully, the best friend, and the messiah, the self-proclaimed leader. Now, the three stories I'm going to talk about today are going to incorporate all of those, the good and the bad types of leadership. And it was an amazing story, and it starts back in 2010. So in 2006, the new person that was going to head the men's program came in, and he did some amazing things from the get-go. We set up the top squad. It meant that all of the lads in the GB squad were now part of this new thing that was called the top squad. And you had the top senior squad, the top junior squad. We came together and we trained together all of the time, and we had this one common goal. The common goal was to get a team to the Olympic Games in London 2012. And what he did a brilliant job of, especially in the early days, was delegating the right people to the right jobs. So he brought in the senior national coach. He brought in Sergey as the junior national coach. We also had two part-time national coaches with lots of experience. So he brought in a guy called Alex Sharayev, and he brought in a guy called Paul Hall, who also worked at their clubs in Huntingdon and Hinckley. And so we had a real good team in place. We had lots of young, enthusiastic, passionate coaches, and we had this real common goal. We were all working towards this goal of reaching the Olympic Games in London 2012. And our results and our performances started to build up. And going into 2010 and the World Championships, where at 17 I was selected to represent Great Britain as the first reserve, super excited. And 2010 was an amazing year. When I look back now, there was so much going on. We had the European Championships, where we did incredibly well as the juniors and the seniors. Seniors got a silver medal at the European Championships. We had the Youth Olympic Games. We had the Commonwealth Games, where nearly everybody in the squad was competing for either England, Scotland, Wales, or Great Britain going to the World Championships. It was just an amazing time. It was like a cauldron of this real positive atmosphere, and it was brilliant. It was an amazing thing to be part of when I look back at that now. And I went into that World Championships as the first reserve, which meant that I did all the training. And when you're a first reserve for a World Championships team or an Olympic team or a European team, you do everything set for compete. And I built up and I lived at Littleshall for 6 weeks with the team, and we had all come together. It was amazing. We had this brilliant bond. All our results were building. Every time we were going to competitions, we were achieving new success and making history. And we went into this World Championships, and the target was to qualify for the team final. So we're all preparing. I'm the first reserve, and incredibly, everything had gone well. The podium session had been brilliant. I'd been on the podium session, and we get to the competition, and it's the night before, okay? Everything's gone to plan. Tomorrow we're going to go out, put in a good performance. We're going to qualify for the World Championship team final for the first time in decades. Now, this next story is unbelievable. When I look back now, and whenever we talk about the lads that were there, it almost seems like it didn't happen. It was like a film, and it was 6 o'clock in the morning, and there's a bang on the door. And I told this story in the episode last week where this is a competition where I was sharing a room with Ruslan. And Ruslan was 27 at the time, and I was 17. And there's a big knock on the door, 6 o'clock in the morning, like really loud. And I look at Ruslan, he wakes up, and the lights are off. And I go to the door, and I open the door, squinted eyes like this. Technical director, head national coach is there. He goes, "Where's Ruslan? I need to see him." I'm like, "What?" I was like, "He's in his bed." And he was like, "I need to see him. Where is he?" Opens the door. Ruslan peeks his head round the corner, and he moves to the next door, and I hear him banging on the next door. I'm looking at Ruslan like, what's going off? So we poke our heads out the door, and we're watching the national coach go door by door, knocking on everyone's room. So he goes to the next room. Dan Purvis, Christian come out. Dan Keatings comes out. Theo gets to the last room. The last room is Lewis, and he's on his own. He bangs on Lewis's room. Lewis opens the door, and then he just walks off. And we're all heads out of this hotel hallway, all looking at each other like, what is going on? The most bizarre thing ever. And then we get a WhatsApp message that calls us to a meeting that morning at breakfast. So we all go to this meeting, and we just get the most bonkers news ever that our 2 national coaches have been arrested. And we're all looking at each other, laughing no way. What? What do you mean they've been arrested? And they're like, this is all the information we've got. The 2 national coaches have been arrested, and they've been sent back home to GB, and they're not going to be here for the rest of the trip. So we're all just this can't be happening. What's going on? Everything's gone to plan. We've done this massive build-up. All the past 4 years have led up to this moment to qualify ourselves a team for the World Championships. We've done this incredible preparation and training. And the 2 national coaches, who are literally the people in charge of telling us what we've got to do and, planning our training sessions, and they'll be there on the competition floor, have been arrested. It was just mental. It was, none of us could believe it. We're in disbelief. And at that moment, we had the 2 other part-time national coaches there, and one of them stood up and took charge, and his name was Alex Sharayev. Now, Alex was Ruslan's personal coach and another gymnast called Yevgeny, and I knew Alex because Ruslan and Yevgeny trained at Loughborough University. So I worked at Loughborough University Sergey as my coach, but alongside Alex as well. And Alex was incredible because he was an amazing technician. And when I was talking about the wise coach, this is where Alex comes into play. And Alex really was like a lifeguard coach. He'd sit there on his little bench in Loughborough like this, nice and quiet, and he'd just watch my gymnastics. And he'd watch, and every now and then he'd say something to me. And it was always in riddles. So he used to say stuff to me like, used to say, Sam, are you looking for money? I'd be like, what? What are you talking about? He'd be like, there's no money on the floor. Don't look for the money. And I'd walk off like scratching my head like, what's he talking about? I still to this day don't understand what that one was about. But he was brilliant. He used to make me laugh, but he was an incredibly intelligent guy, very, very smart, and was a brilliant technician. And he would sit back and watch everything play. And he was very calm. He never raised his voice, never really got emotional. And really understood, I think, himself, had that self-awareness. He had a lot of experience. He was an older coach at the time. You know, he kind of lost a lot of that ballsy enthusiasm and passion that a lot of young coaches come into the gym with in the beginning. And, you know, he had been through it. He'd seen it. And he was the perfect person to be in this situation because it was so chaotic. And we had no idea what was going to happen. We didn't know who's going to lead the warm-up, who's going to tell us what to do in the comp. And he lined us up and he was absolutely brilliant. He was so calm. He told us exactly what we needed to do in the training session. I think we had one more session left to do. And we came out of it saying, how good was Alex? I just couldn't believe how brilliant he was to be calm in that situation. And also the technical director at the time had put Alex into that place and understood that, you know, he could have jumped in, but he didn't. He put Alex there and, trusted his coaching experience, and it was amazing. I mean, the one thing that did make me laugh, and Christian tells this story quite a lot, is that the one thing he did get wrong, but it's just a funny story, is when Christian was putting his hand up to do the vault at the World Championships in 2010, Alex put the springboard the wrong way round. So the springboard was facing the opposite way. Christian had to shout, Alex, the board's the wrong way round. So he went and turned it back around, but we did unbelievably well. And I tell you what, the result in that competition, which was 4th place in the qualifying, is a testament to his leadership skills in that situation, because that really could have completely thrown us all off. But we'd done the training, we were well prepared. We needed somebody that could handle that situation, and more than anything, keep all of the emotion out of it and make good, logical, rational decisions. And he did that. And I think when you're in a pressured situation like that, and, you know, you're the athletes and you're going out to compete, you're under so much pressure, you know, from yourself. You're feeling the pressure of the training, the commitment you've had for 6 months. You know, you're thinking about all these things. Ultimately, you've got to go out there, put your hand up and perform. Having somebody in a leadership role that keeps very calm, that you can look to when you're in a stressful situation and they make you feel at ease, is massively important. Yeah, so for that experience for me was incredible to have been part of. And lucky, and it was almost, I was lucky in that I was able to observe it, see it, feel it, but I didn't have to go out there in that pressured situation and put my hand up, because at 17, given the fact that one of the coaches that got sent home was my coach, I'm not sure how I would have quite handled that. But yeah, what an experience. And just still to this day, I look back and I go, I can't believe they were both arrested. And we never found out what it was. And it's funny, Sergey did tell me that when I retired, he would tell me exactly what happened. Yeah, but so I still need to ask him. I'm sure he'll tell me one day. But yeah, what an amazing learning experience. And really the coolest thing about that was that I was able to see the positive impact of real good leadership and what that can do to a performance in a team like that. Amazing. Because we really were under extreme pressure. So to have come out of it, qualified in 4th, and then I've got to say for the lads as well in that team, to have qualified 4th at World Championships, and the last team event we'd been 15th, I think, in 2007. So that's a massive jump. And then to go into the final and finish 7th, incredible achievement. Something I feel so lucky to have witnessed and seen that all unfold, because that's just a life experience that not many people get to be part of. And I guess moving on from that, you know, making those incredible decisions, there was certainly, you know, a lot of conversations that needed to be had after that competition. And, you know, I'm sure that the 2 national coaches that got arrested, you know, got a good telling off. for sure. And there were, me and both my training partner at the time, Sam, we had to have conversations with Sergey and basically say, Sergey, whatever happened, whether it was your fault or not, that's not okay. You can't put us in that situation again. And from that point on, he never did do that again. And I think that's a big part of being a leader. You've got to hold your hands up and say, look, I made a mistake. And you have to, like I said, be that person that's on the chopping block. You've got to take the accountability and the responsibility. And whatever those consequences are, you've got to take them. We moved on to 2011. We put all of that behind us. And the next big competition was going to be the 2011 World Championships. And I've spoke about this one a number of times on the podcast, but this really was probably the biggest learning experience I've ever had in my career, just to be able to witness leadership under extreme amounts of pressure. And we got into that World Championships. We were nailed on to qualify a team for the Olympic Games. And it was interesting how some of the decisions that were being made in the lead up to that, I've talked about before how I had that broken collarbone. And in many ways, I was being encouraged and pushed to keep on competing. I also wanted to do that. I didn't want to miss out on that World Championships. One really interesting decision that was made was we had a British Championships. I believe it was in the September. Now, for some reason, the person in charge at that time decided that, okay, at this British Championships, we need to inflate the scores of the gymnasts. So if you go back and you look at the results of the British Championships in 2011, the three top all-around scores were something like 92, 92 and 91. And nobody had ever scored those scores from Great Britain before. They were ridiculous scores. And I had done so badly in that competition that even with the ridiculously inflated scores, I still only scored like an 84 or an 85. So I'd done really bad, which probably says a lot about the fact that I shouldn't have been selected for that competition at all. But that was a really, really interesting, weird move now, because that really changed the psychology going into that World Championships. And I understand why they did it. They wanted all the other countries in the world to see that the Great Britain team had three all-arounders that were scoring 92, 91 and 91. But the reality was we didn't. And the problem was that when we went out to that World Championships in 2011, all the other teams were now looking at us like, well, let's see you score 92 and 91 now. And it was almost like it had annoyed the other teams, because it wasn't the reality. And what it did was put a lot of pressure on those three gymnasts and those three all-rounders. And I'd noticed that, and they were feeling that pressure, and we'd gone out into that competition. I was picked to compete after that decision that I spoke about to put me and Max up against each other 1v1 in the podium to decide who was going to compete for the World Championships team. And then what unfolded in that competition was an absolute disaster. It was terrible. And at that time, we had one of the national coaches and one of the part-time national coaches, not the coach that had been on the floor a year before at the World Championships, a different one. It was Lewis's personal coach had been on the floor. Now, it all went terribly wrong in this competition, and I think between the team we probably had almost 10 falls between us, and two of the all-arounders that went to compete and had scored 91 and 91 at that British Championships had 3 or 4 falls each, didn't qualify for the all-around final, and we ended up finishing in 10th place. So a massive failure in the eyes of us, the coaches, the system, British Gymnastics, because we were expected to qualify no problem. We'd be in the top 5 and we'd be fighting for a medal. So it was a massive, massive letdown and a big failure. And the response to that was really interesting. And what happened in that moment was that there was a real lack of accountability from the leadership for the mistakes that were made and decisions that were made. So we all had to have meetings after that competition straight afterwards, and we all had personal meetings. And the way these meetings were framed at us was really interesting. Like looking back now, it was, for us as gymnasts and athletes, we kind of, I think, unanimously voiced our concerns that actually the decision to not select the team until 2 days before just put a huge amount of stress on everybody within the team. And the right decision would have been to have made that decision much earlier, before we even left to get to Japan. But it was kind of spun on us all the time. I remember saying that, and it was going, no. But what do you think you did wrong in this build-up that you could get right to make sure this doesn't happen again? And I was like, well, you know, you've got to bear in mind at the time I had a broken collarbone. I'd just torn my pec in the qualification event. I was like, I don't think there was much more I could have done. I'm in agony. Like, it just didn't go well. So yeah, it was really weird, that experience of having like the people in leadership just not wanting to accept the fact they'd made some really poor leadership decisions in that situation. And then when we got back from that World Championships, the next training camp we went on, this was even more interesting. And I guess this almost comes back to that kind of like bullying type leadership that I experienced. And it was the performance director at the time. And we sat in a room and they made us watch back our performance, which we didn't want to do. We knew it was terrible. We'd all watched it already on our own terms by ourselves, and we didn't really want to relive that. But we sat through and we had to watch every single routine. And at the end of it, the performance director, who has no background in gymnastics, I think he'd maybe come from swimming. That's where he'd been before. He sat there and he said, "To be honest, lads, there was nothing flashy there. It wasn't very impressive." I can remember leaving that meeting and we kind of all said, "Did you hear what he said? Like, there was nothing flashy. Like, what does he know? He's never done gymnastics himself. He's never been in the gymnastics environment." Like, what? That just seemed really odd. And again, it was that lack of accountability and taking responsibility, and it was just all put on us as the athlete. And look, we've got to go out there and compete. So you often hear this argument a lot of the time in football, you know, and you'll be listening to Sky Sports, and, you know, when a team's not doing well, how much responsibility is on the manager, how much responsibility is on the coach, and how much is on the players. And ultimately, it's our job to put our hand up. But those decisions that are made in leadership have a huge knock-on effect, massively. And the way I feel is that if you're going to be the person in charge, and when you get all the success, if you're going to take the limelight, then you've got to be prepared for when that doesn't go well, to take that responsibility as well. And I think the leaders that I've worked with are the best of that. When things have gone well, they kind of deflect it off the athletes and they take it on themselves. So that was just a huge learning experience for me, 2011. And the amazing thing from that was that after the World Championships, there were a lot of changes. They made some decisions and they made some big calls. So the technical director at the time decided that from that moment on, he was going to be on the floor. He was going to be there. Rather than sitting in the stands watching the competition, he'd be there. And that was a big move, you know. He took one of the personal coaches or one of the part-time national coaches off and said, "It's going to be me and the national coach now." I think that was a really, really good move at that time, you know, because it showed strong leadership and it was a big decision. And when we went into the end of 2011, the start of 2012, and the lads competed in the test event, we did incredibly well, you know. And I think what happened then in that moment was that we all came together and he was able to galvanize this kind of bond that we had, and we did. It was a special bond that we'd shared because we'd all felt like we'd let everybody down, let the program down, let the rest of the team down. And we didn't want to waste those 5 years from 2006 with this common goal and this dream to get to the Olympic Games. And it kind of brought everybody closer. And I think you often find that happens in a time of, you know, when things have gone wrong, in a bad situation, when your back's against the wall and you're struggling. That's probably when you build your closest bonds with the people around you and your team, and you need a strong leader and maybe the person that can make those right decisions and bring people together. And I think during that time and that period, the guy that was in charge, he was really good at that. He did a great job. And yeah, it united us. We went to the test event. I wasn't part of that team. I was recovering from my injury, and they did really well and they won a gold medal. And I've spoke about this before. And during that time, whenever a GB team would go out to compete, even if I wasn't part of it, I felt part of it, because the leadership and the coaching team made me feel like I was part of that goal and I was part of that medal they brought home, or that little piece of success or history they made. You know, my efforts in the gym all helped towards that. So that was really cool. And I think that carried on into London 2012. And the decisions that were made following the big mistakes that were made by the athletes, but also the leadership team in 2011, I think they'd figured that out and they put them in place. And that's, like I'd spoke about at the start, leadership is an ongoing thing. You don't get it right straight away, and you've got to be able to put your hands up when you make mistakes. And I think that's really important as an athlete or as a employee or somebody that's working under a leader, is to see that they're willing to be vulnerable and put their hands up and say, I don't know this, or I made a mistake. Okay, who can I bring in that's really good in this area that can make a big difference because I don't possess these skills or this skill set? That's amazing. And for me, I always want to work with those people. Like, I feel like I've got a better connection with them if they're being very honest and they're super self-aware. Because what you don't want is people pretending to know what they don't know. That's really not helpful in those big, stressful situations. And so going into London 2012, we had this togetherness, that united all of us, and we came together. And, off the back of London 2012, I guess when we went into that team final and we were under the most amount of pressure we'd ever been under, and there was 20,000 people watching, there was royalty, there was millions of people on TV, and this was the one moment we'd talked about for 6 years. All of us, we dreamt of being here, and all of our teammates that weren't there that had also dreamt of being there, and our teammates and our families and the coaches and the gymnastics clubs. This was a massive moment. And when it all began to go wrong in that split second when I missed the high bar, because we'd made those mistakes in 2011, the leadership was able to calm the situation down, switch focus, and it was brilliant. And one thing that had happened in 2011 I forgot to talk about was that we had all been asked to essentially vote for a team captain. And this is a really important thing to talk about because being a team captain is a big role. It's massive. And in the situation in 2011, the team captain at the time was under an extreme amount of pressure to perform and was one of the athletes that had scored one of those inflated scores at the British Championships, and really just had to focus on his performance. And when it all went wrong, another athlete stood up in that moment and tried to really take charge and bring us together. And I remember after floor, we'd not had a good floor. We were going into the pommel horse. It was this athlete's big moment because it was the only apparatus they were performing on. And it wasn't the coaches, it wasn't anybody in that team. He brought us together and got us in a huddle and said, come on, boys, we can do this. We've worked too hard for this. And we went out and we made more mistakes on the pommel horse, but he hit a brilliant routine. And the decision was made after that because he was only going to probably perform on one apparatus or maybe two at most in the next big major championships, it was decided he was going to be the team captain, and he really stood up, and he was a brilliant captain, I've got to say. Like, for me, looking back, I had two amazing team captains in my career. I had Lewis Smith and I had Christian Thomas. And I believe that Christian Thomas became an amazing team captain because of the experiences we went through in 2010, 2011, 2012. And I think Lewis did so well in 2012. And he really was, Lewis was an individual athlete competing on one apparatus. But let me tell you, he was an unbelievable team player. And he would, as soon as he was selected for a competition and he was part of a team, he would be all in helping the team. He'd sometimes only compete on one apparatus. He'd have to watch everybody go around all the 5 other apparatus. That's 5 other guys doing all their routines before he did pommel horse. And he'd be there supporting everyone. He was brilliant. I have to say, Lewis was an amazing team captain in London 2012. It worked, And in that split-second moment where I missed the high bar and I thought everything was going to go wrong, Christian was able to focus on his performance and what he needed to do for the team, hit that incredible high bar routine. Lewis was able to bring us all together. He was able to calm me down in that situation. And we went on to make history and become the 3rd best team on the planet. And what an amazing story. So I think, hopefully, throughout that little story that I've told you there, you've been able to see all those different types of leadership and how, even if at one point a leader might struggle and make a mistake, it doesn't mean you can't improve and do it right in the future. And I think that's the most important thing, because you're never going to get somebody that's born a perfect leader. They're going to have to make those mistakes. And for me, I've experienced, so many different types of leadership, and I've been so lucky to be a part of that. And the reason I think I've been fascinated with leadership since I was a kid is that, my dad and my granddad and my coach, they've instilled those values and principles in me that are really important, and I think people look to when times are tough and things go wrong. And I think it's one thing we're probably missing a little bit in society today is strong leadership. People seem to be crying out for that, for people they can look to that have got good morals, good principles, good values, and will put their neck out and they'll stick up for other people, and they'll say things that are maybe frowned upon or they're scared of, but they believe in them and they've got authenticity. That's massive, And it is. And it's so hard to be a strong leader. I know that. I'm a Manchester United fan. And we've spent the past 10 years trying to find somebody that can recreate what Sir Alex Ferguson had at the club, It's hard. It's really difficult. There's no one answer. There's no quick way to success. And I just feel so lucky that I've been able to experience those things. I've been an athlete under some incredible team captains. I've worked under some incredible coaches, some incredible technical directors and head coaches, and people that have got things right and made mistakes. And I think leadership for me is something that I'll always find fascinating. I love it. I like, my girlfriend Connie, she laughs at me. I love things when you're part of a team. I love being part of a team, man. It's like my favourite thing to do ever. When I was in gymnastics, I'd rather be part of a team than competing as an individual. It always meant so much more to me. I love that idea of trying to bring people together to work for this common goal. They've all got different motivations and are from different backgrounds and different walks of life. How can you get those people and understand what makes them tick? How can I inspire them and motivate them all to work towards this common goal that's bigger than the individual? That's always been so fascinating for me. And it's been an amazing experience being able to learn about leadership through the vehicle of sport, because, sport is an amazing thing. And like I spoke about a little bit last week in the episode, stress and difficult situations really reveal character. And hopefully, those leadership qualities that I've seen in others will help me in the future and in life. And I've just been very lucky to have the career I've had and to have experienced all of that. And a massive thank you to all of those great leaders that I've had in my life and the people that continue to give me advice and, act as like a shining example. And I think one of the most important things to say about those people is that they're not perfect. It's an imperfect world. And it's, you should never put people on a pedestal, because everybody makes mistakes. But those people that are able to be strong leaders, we need to protect them, man, because they're rare and there's not many of them. And I've really enjoyed, talking about my experiences of leadership today. Hopefully you've found that valuable and you can relate and identify some of the great leaders in your life, and you can think about that a little bit more and try and be a great leader yourself, within your little community, within your club, within your workplace. Be somebody that people can look to have strong morals, principles, values, and people can lean on in a time of crisis. I think that's super important. So thank you for listening. I really hope you've enjoyed this episode. Thanks again for all the support. I'm really enjoying it at the moment. I'm very excited to start potentially getting some guests in to share their stories. If you've enjoyed this episode of the Sam Oldham podcast, make sure to give it a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcasts, and subscribe. We release new episodes every single week, and you can also follow us on social media. So Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, but more than anything, thank you for supporting the podcast. It makes a big difference. It means that we can keep doing this, and I will see you in the next episode. Thank you.